We're back on InfoWars Nightly News, and I'm delighted to be joined by Lloyd Chapman, president and founder of the American Small Business League, to discuss the Obama administration's war on small business, the latest jobs figures, and the collapse in self-employment. And the website is asbl.com. Lloyd, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Good to have you. So we're going to get into the latest jobs figures in a moment, but just encapsulate for the audience how the Obama administration's policy towards small businesses in America has unfolded over the course of the past 4 or 5 years in comparison to their treatment of large corporations.
Well, I think a good example is the most recent budget he put out. During his 10-minute budget speech, he mentioned jobs 14 times. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, small businesses are responsible for over 90% of the net new jobs in America. So he cut the Small Business Administration budget by 12%, while he raised the Commerce Department's budget by 34%. And the Commerce Department is the federal agency that pushes, Fortune 500 firms. So I think the U.S. Census Bureau data is probably correct. If it's correct, it means that Fortune 500 firms are responsible for less than 10% of the jobs. Small business over 90. He cut the small business budget and boosted the big business, Commerce Department budget. And that's typical. In fact, when you say Obama's war on small business, a lot of people, don't believe that. And I always say you need to quit listening to what he says and start watching what he does. And today, the budget of the Small Business Administration is less than what it was when Ronald Reagan was president. And when you look at Obama's policies, he's had very anti-small business policies. And these are just the facts. You can look at the reports like the one you're talking about. And he's one of the most anti-small business presidents, that I've ever seen.
Now, we've got the job figures out today. Of course, we know the real unemployment figures never see the light of day because they don't count the people that have actually stopped looking for work. But there's much, hollering and high-fiving over these new numbers today. Government jobs are on the rise, as they have been over the past several months. But Lloyd, the same can't be said for self-employment and small business, can it?
No. Small businesses have been devastated. And again, I like to just stick to the facts. And, the Census Bureau says that small businesses in America are responsible for over half the gross domestic product, over half the private sector workforce, and over 90% of all U.S. exporters are small businesses, and 98% of all U.S. firms are small businesses. And I believe something like 20% of the people in America are self-employed. And they've just, suffered tremendously in the last few years. I believe in both TARP and the American Reinvestment Recovery Act, the small businesses where most Americans work, where all the jobs are created, got less than 5% of the money, while the big corporations that, are paying, single-digit income tax and are shipping jobs overseas got, I think, about 95% of the money that went to businesses.
Now, in terms of these government jobs, we had a government unemployment rate of 5.7% in July 2012. That's now come down to 3.3%. So a lot of these new jobs that are being created as the economic recovery is hailed are government jobs. They're not self-employment. They're not small business. So what kind of economy are we going to see develop if more and more people are becoming dependent on government jobs?
It's not looking good. It's very discouraging. And, I was watching actually this morning, the guy that founded AOL, forgot his name, talking about, they were talking about immigration laws. And they were saying something like, half of all the Fortune 500 firms were started by immigrants, and talking about Silicon Valley here in California, where most of the companies are started by immigrants. And those all started as small businesses. Those are all small businesses. So to have more and more people working for the government and fewer people being self-employed is the opposite of the way you'd want the country to go. And of course, as the government grows and more people work for the government, our taxes are going to go up, and the government's control over your life is going to go up. So that's just the opposite of what you would want and where you want the country to go. We need the government to get smaller. We need fewer people to be working for the government and more people to be self-employed.
I mean, there's this article that's linked on Drudge today, which gets into a lot of stats on this. The percentage of Americans that are self-employed fell by more than 20% between 1991 and 2010. And as a share of the population, the percentage of new entrepreneurs and business owners dropped by a staggering 53% between 1977 and 2010. So why are we seeing this staggering decline in small businesses and self-employed people in America?
Well, you use the term war on small business. And again, that to a lot of people, that might sound kind of, hard to believe, but it's true. When you just look at the facts, again, I like to just stick to the facts. One of the biggest issues that I talk about all the time is that there's a federal law here in America that says that a minimum of 23% of all the money the government spends should go to small businesses. That's very logical since most Americans work for small businesses. They create 90% of the jobs, half the gross domestic product. That makes sense. But every year for the last 15 years, most of that money that's supposed to go to small businesses has been diverted to Fortune 500 firms. And both the House and Senate small business committees are heavily influenced by Fortune 500 firms. So I've seen a fairly aggressive campaign on the part of big businesses to push what I'll call anti-small business legislation, anti-small business policies. I'll give you a good example. If the listeners right now, we ask them, come up with a federal policy that how long should a company be allowed to stay a small business once they're acquired by a Fortune 500 firm? Most people would say, well, immediately, as soon as they're purchased by the large business or within a few weeks or months. The federal government a few years ago had a policy where the large business could buy a small business and keep that status for the purpose of government contracts for 20 years, 2 decades. That's shocking. Today, it's still 5 years. And when you look at America again, the Small Business Administration is the only agency in this country to help out the 28 million small businesses where most Americans work, again, where 90% of the jobs are created. And that agency has a minuscule budget of around, I think, $750 million, and now Obama's going to cut that. So just look at the facts, and you'll see that the government has a clear pattern of adopting anti-small business policies, anti-small business legislation, and you can see it in the economy, and these statistics, clearly reflect it. But the Small Business Administration should have a budget that's probably, $25 billion, not the $750 million that they're trying to keep their doors open with. But it's very unfortunate. Mainstream media won't talk about this. I was watching CNN today, and if you watch any of the major cable news channels, the ads are all about small businesses. I've heard this one commercial so many times I've got it memorized. I guess I don't have a small business, I've got a fast business. And all the commercials talk about small businesses, but you never hear network news or cable news mention small businesses. It's almost like it's against their rules or something like that. But no matter what happens to small businesses, they will never mention it.
Now, running parallel to this, what we've described as a war on small businesses, is the Obama administration's war on energy independence in America, which seems to be a completely deliberate program to shut down energy independence in America, of course, with Obama threatening bankruptcy to anyone who tries to open a coal-fired plant. Do you think, in regard to small business as well, is this bumbling incompetency, or do we have a deliberate statist agenda to literally wreck the American dream? And why are they so pernicious in their agenda to do that, if that's the case?
Well, it's certainly not incompetence. It's certainly by design. Nothing the government does is through incompetence. It's all done very strategically by very smart people. And basically, I think it's the oil and gas industry is pushing that. They're against anything other than gasoline and oil. Again, when you can't get stories about this on the news. If people will watch these cable news channels, you'll notice that the American Petroleum Institute has back-to-back ads on all these cable channels all day long. They've got tremendous influence in the mainstream media and in the government. You can go online and look and see that the major oil companies in the last few years have actually paid, some of them like ExxonMobil, zero federal income tax. I think it was 2010, ExxonMobil had record profits and paid zero, not a penny of federal tax. And that's an example of the kind of clout they've got in government and with the Obama administration. But it's not new to the Obama administration. They've had a lot of power for a long time. But so I think when you talk about Obama's policy around, let's say, coal-fired plants or small businesses, you're seeing the voice of big business and big money in our government.
Now, the comedian Jay Leno recently joked that if Obama really wanted to close down Guantanamo Bay, he should do what he always does, declare it a small business and tax it out of existence. And you mentioned the tax previously. We've also got, the likes of Google, Amazon, Starbucks, eBay, Facebook. Some of the biggest corporations in the world, they're paying a pittance in taxes while the American middle class small businesses are being told to dig deeper in their pockets.
Right.
What does that kind of two-tier approach tell us about the economic system that we're currently living under?
I think it tells us that our government's completely and totally corrupt. There's no question about it. I don't care if you're a Democrat, or Republican, or Libertarian. You got to realize our government's corrupt. I've been to Washington many times. I've walked the halls of Congress and trying to get legislation passed for small businesses. It's not going to happen. I've got a bill right now in Congress, by the way, called the Fairness and Transparency Contracting Act. Congressman Hank Johnson from Georgia introduced it. And I'm going to try to get that bill passed, but that bill has no chance of passing because it's going to help the middle class and help small businesses. And big corporations aren't going to allow that. And but yeah, our government's corrupt. It's just unbelievable. And if you go back and look at the quotes of Thomas Jefferson, the founding fathers knew this would happen. They knew it. I think Thomas Jefferson said something like that banking institutions are a bigger threat to our liberties than standing armies. Mm-hmm. And Eisenhower talked about the power of the growing military-industrial complex. He warned about that. So what people like Eisenhower and even Thomas Jefferson talked about, we're seeing it today. The power of the financial industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the oil and gas industry, the defense industry. They run our government, and it's not going to turn out well. It's just not going to turn out well. And I think the government knows that, by the way. I'm sure Alex has done this story. In fact, I think I saw him talking about it, about Homeland Security buying 2 billion rounds of hollow point bullets and 7,000 automatic weapons and 2,700 urban assault vehicles, to be used here domestically. And so they know that something's going to happen. They suspect that people are going to get tired of this stuff and start protesting. So I think they're getting ready for it because they know that the people are not going to put up with this stuff, for much longer.
They really do seem to be gearing up for some kind of collapse, whether that be widespread or contained. But I mean, a lot of people cite the book, 1984, George Orwell, as a kind of warning from history about the police state and Big Brother. There was also a book written 50, 60 years ago called Atlas Shrugged, which is quite chilling if you read it and compare it to the Obama administration's policy on business in 2013. Do you think they're actually using Atlas Shrugged as a kind of instruction manual? Because it's not far off, is it?
It seems like it, doesn't it? But what they're doing, by the way, is they're listening to the corporate lobbyist. One of the funniest things that I've ever seen was Obama had a jobs council. And again, when you look at the Census Bureau data, Fortune 500 firms have created less than 10% of jobs in the last 30 years. And yet his jobs council was all Fortune 500 firms, no small businesses. And the funniest thing was the chair of the jobs council was the president of General Electric. And no company in America has shipped more jobs overseas than General Electric. So no one knows less about how to create jobs in America than General Electric. And that's who Obama put as head of his jobs council. And that's classic, Barack Obama and a classic Washington, bureaucracy. But I'm sure those large corporations contributed hundreds of millions to his campaign. But
precisely. General Electric, Goldman Sachs, all of them.
Well,
wanted to touch on Obamacare as well. As I understand it, a lot of the big businesses are getting waivers while the small businesses are being forced to labor under these new costs and bureaucracy. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, to tell you the truth, they've come out with more and more policies, for small businesses. And the funny thing is, they're considering a small business anyone that has less than 50 employees. And yet today, the Obama administration is considering some of the biggest companies on earth, to be small businesses for the purpose of government contracts. So Obama's giving small business contracts to Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, Raytheon, Rolls-Royce, British Aerospace, Finmeccanica, big defense contractor in Italy. Roseborn Exports got over $900 million in federal small business contracts a few months ago. That's a Russian-owned international arms dealer. And yet when it comes to these policies, they're just stacking up these policies for small businesses, and it literally is. It's like they're trying to do everything they can to hurt small businesses and the middle class economy, and do everything they can to help the big businesses. It's just unbelievable. And of course, if you talk about this, if you try to talk about the mainstream media, you're a conspiracy nut. If you just read the federal investigations about the fact that the Obama administration is giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms, you're a conspiracy nut, and mainstream media won't talk about it.
It's amazing how they apply that pejorative term to absolutely everything, and it's just a cheap trick to shut down dissent. They do it with every single topic. Just in closing, tell people about your website and how they can support your organization.
Well, my website, ASBL.com, and again, the federal law says 23% of all government contracts should go to small businesses. And I've been fighting the government for over a decade to simply get them to quit giving small businesses to Fortune 500 firms. I would imagine about 99% of all Americans agree with me. So I think people should call their congressman and tell their congressman to support the Fairness and Transparency Contracting Act, which will simply stop the government from giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms in the U.S. and some of the biggest companies around the world. That'll direct more existing infrastructure spending into the middle class, and I think create more jobs than any economic stimulus program that's ever been proposed. It's also free, no new taxes, no new spending. So we're just trying to help out small business and help the middle class here, and I'll have to tell you, it's an uphill battle with the Obama administration, with the mainstream media. So we'll appreciate any help people will give us in that.
Okay, we're going to leave it there for now. Lloyd Chapman, president and founder of the American Small Business League. Thanks for joining us on InfoWars Nightly News.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Stick around after the break. David Knight in studio interviews the two men arrested for drinking iced tea in a parking lot. Stay tuned.
Black boots kicking doors in, man. That's what's to come. That's what's happening right now as we speak. The masses of the people that have voted for Barack Obama was groomed well via MTV, BET, and some of the multinational corporations that influence entertainment, arts, and culture. The people that control the media could probably fit right in this room with snacks right around. Monsanto's, the World Army, FEMA camps, World Bank, Federal Reserve, those who constructed the Patriot Act, all of them in bed. There's so many wicked things going on in the government that, hell, we can't even tell you. You don't have the card, you don't know the handshake, you don't know the code word. And you need to kind of get used to that. We're doing it. We're putting together the documents. We're putting together the websites and the information. And InfoWarriors are going out spreading the truth.